Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sarah Spinks.
Hello and welcome back to Safeguarding Conversations. In this podcast, we're looking at something schools are seeing more and more of, but they may not always recognise. We're talking today about hidden homelessness among children and families. When we think of homelessness, most of people, I think, picture somebody, maybe sleeping rough on the street. But that is just one version, really, of it. What we're focusing on today is hidden homelessness, and that's something far more widespread, and it's much harder to spot.
Absolutely. Hidden homelessness is when families or young people don't have a secure place to live, but they aren't counted in official statistics. And that includes sofa surfing, staying in hostels, living in overcrowded flats or temporary accommodations like B&Bs.
And for schools, that presents a real challenge, Sarah, doesn't it? Because these children may not be flagged by any of the support systems, but the risks that they may be facing are very real.
Yeah, and I think we need to take a moment to talk about scale here.
Yeah.
At the end of 2023, 145,800 children were living in temporary accommodation in England alone. And that's a 15% rise in just 1 year, according to Shelter.
Gosh, and if you widen that out, we've got more than 370,000, households that were either homeless or at immediate risk. That's the highest number since the records, when we, started keeping records, since we began recording this.
And I think it's really important to remember that those are just the visible cases.
Yeah.
The hidden figures, well, they're much higher, I bet. Many families avoid contact with services because they're afraid of losing custody or facing immigration issues or just being judged.
And that's where I think possibly this label, hidden homelessness, is a little bit misleading, isn't it? Because what we're talking about really is statistically, it's hidden because it's not being recorded, but we do know it's very, very visible because it's actually happening.
Yeah.
So I think let's talk about children. They're at the heart of this. What does hidden homelessness actually look like from their perspective?
Well, I think firstly, we just say, there's the education disruption, isn't it? Families moving frequently, so children might be jumping from one school to the other or missing large chunks of learning. But there's also, I've seen documentaries where children are moved to temporary accommodation a very long way from their school, but parents are still keeping them at that school. So they might have an hour, sometimes 2 hours journey to get to and from school, to keep those children in the same schooling. So that education disruption is very real.
And also there's, going alongside that, there's the emotional toll, isn't there?
Yeah.
As you've said, chronic tiredness, not just from, as you've pointed out, the travelling. They're often in noisy or overcrowded spaces. There's anxiety from instability, shame, withdrawal, especially if they're unable to keep up with their peers and do the things that their peers are doing.
Absolutely. And let's not forget safety. Older children might avoid home altogether to escape those cramped conditions. And that opens them up then to exploitation, and that's that safeguarding concern. So there is that safeguarding concern, I would say, in every case.
Yeah. And so we're really talking about looking at this as one of the topics we need to look at in terms of contextual safeguarding, isn't it? It's
definitely.
Even though we know that these are not ideal situations and they can be risky situations in the home itself, often the contextual safeguarding risks, that is the risks outside the home, may be significantly raised for these children. I think the tricky thing is there's rarely a big red flag that says this child is homeless. So I think it would be useful, Sarah, just to have maybe a little bit of a think about what should schools be looking for.
Well, I think it's about the little things, actually. You know, a pupil who's always tired, constantly missing PE kits or lunch, a child who starts to disengage or seems suddenly withdrawn. A lot of those signs that we would indicate that, that do indicate some sort of safeguarding issue, then homelessness might be one worth delving into as well.
I think, we're talking about keeping it on the radar here, aren't we? I mean, we might hear them casually mention moving house again, or that they are sleeping, had to sleep on the floor, or maybe it's sometimes, a parent who seems anxious or is avoiding contact with school or avoiding meeting with school. We must recognise that we really focus, don't we, on building really good relationships wherever we possibly can with parents. But often, as Sarah, we've both held caseloads. There are a lot of situations where parents do not contact and do not seek support. And that's where, I think it's about that real safeguarding vigilance.
Absolutely. And as we often say, these are all pieces of a puzzle.
Yeah.
They're on their own, they might not shout out safeguarding risk, but together they tell that story. As we keep saying, it's the jigsaw pieces that we often talk about when we discuss safeguarding. Those pieces, which when placed together, reveal a picture of deep concern.
So what can schools actually do about hidden homelessness?
Well, I think first, raise awareness, include it in staff briefings and safeguarding training. Teachers and support staff are more likely to pick up on the small things if they know what to look for. Actually raise it as an awareness, really. I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, keep it on the radar. And I'm just going to add another biggie. It is about building strong relationships with the families. As I said, if parents feel safe and not judged, they're more likely to open up early, or they're more likely to approach and seek support, or just access not just support services available in the community, but available through the contact through that relationship they build with the schools.
Yeah, that's huge relationships. And I think thirdly, work closely with local authorities. Sometimes the housing teams don't know where children are attending school. Good communication between services is essential. And I know from when I was a head teacher in a very, very deprived inner city area, we worked very closely with a lot of services, not just the local authority, but charitable services nearby as well. And we ended up using an area in our school to collect beds and essential pieces of housing materials as well, and some white goods for those families that we knew were really struggling or were having to move. So it's about having those good relationships and working closely with those people around us. We had a great relationship with our local church, for example, who had a fabulous charitable arm. And so those things are really important as well.
And I think sometimes, I know I've been in a similar situation. The unit that I headed up was in a very, very similar area to the one that you worked in, Sarah. And I think it is often, you can underestimate the impact you can have in a situation where a parent is, maybe desperately trying to access a better, safer place for their family. Sometimes the fact that school is involved or school having a voice in that process can really add a lot of weight to actually things happening, being made to happen.
Yeah.
I think we often say, don't we, that safeguarding is about seeing the child behind the behaviour. And in cases of hidden homelessness, it's also about seeing the context behind the child, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's practical stuff, isn't there? You know. So I'm thinking about, donated uniform, quiet spaces at lunch, flexibility with homework, small things that can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And I think also record your concerns. Even if nothing is disclosed directly, those notes can be crucial later if a referral needs to be made.
I think, absolutely. As I've said before, it's about seeing the context behind the child, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And that, if we wait for children to show up in the system, we'll miss them.
Yeah.
But if we stay alert and we are compassionate and proactive, schools can be a real lifeline for those families when they need it.
Well, I'm glad that we were talking about this today. I think it is really important. It's one of these things that it's kind of a subject that everybody knows is happening, really, but it's about really placing that safeguarding focus on it, isn't it? And we've produced an article on this as well, which is available on the SSS Learning website, which you can access as well. And please feel free to share that or use that as a resource with staff. If this episode has resonated with you, do share it with your DSL, your team, your local network. Examples of this, these stories, they need to be heard. They need, most importantly, to be on our safeguarding radar. And we need to keep looking for what we call the quiet signs, those little signs, because sometimes a child's home life is far more precarious than it appears.